That's okay now?
Okay.
Okay. So it's about tourist performance. It's in investigation, the special dimensions within European Union. To be exact, within the 19 countries of the Eurozone. Some introduction. It's the role of international tourism flows improves the welfare of the country's citizens, and there have been many contributions that recognize the impact of tourism on economic development and growth. The fact is that globalization distinguished tourism from other industries, and the intercorrection of globalization with tourism performance is a key element of the current analysis. And it's explored through multiple channels and variables. The elevation of economic characteristics is directly related to improvements for the competitive positions of European tourist services. And although there have been well recognized the importance of several special meta features of tourism, the existing literature has not adequately evaluated the comparative performance of destinations. We have some literature review. So Rafih in 2019 said that tourism performance is significantly explained by core resources as well as complementary condition, globalization, tourism price. Takahashi in 2020 proved that in destinations highly dependent on tourism, demand tends to result in a high income market, but global phenomena affect the economy. And he also said that good accessibility is likely present in destinations with diversified industries, leading to lower tourism impact from global economy. Tuksu in 2014 indicated that tourism economic growth direction of causality depends on the tourism indicator and country group, while the Mediterranean region countries are better able to generate tourism growth between European countries. Assaker in 2014 indicated that the economy indirectly but positively impacts on tourist competitiveness through the infrastructure and the environment, while the last two directly and positively impact on tourism competitiveness. Kalia in 2016 found that there is a positive and highly significant relationship between governance, internet availability, and tourism flows, while Andrades and Caldito in 2014 suggested that there are a connection between competitiveness determinants of a tourism destination and identified the influence of these relationships and determinants over the competitiveness of a tourist destination. Safiullah in 2019 underlined that instead of designing one-size-fits-all policies, it is important to design targeted policies that consider that the economic and social structure of its territory. Martí Puertas in 2017 suggested that European Mediterranean countries need to apply policies to enable the transformation of competitiveness into a greater number of tourists, as they are not efficiently exploiting their tourism capacity. And last but not least, Asaf and Zosiasen in 2012 indicated the 10 most positive and 10 most negative determinants of tourist performance. They also ranked the top 20 international countries based on their tourism performance. So here about data and methodology in stage 1. For the purpose of this study, we collected data from several open access online resources. The data sets includes 19 Eurozone countries for the period 2000 to 2019. And for this stage, we collected data from World Bank, Eurostat, and World Travel and Tourism Council. For computation of the performance index of tourism for all countries across the examined period, we took into consideration a set of input variables for the tourism industry, as you can see in the table. So Our inputs here are air transport register carrier departures worldwide, arrivals at tourist accommodation establishments, contribution of travel and tourism to employment, contribution of travel and tourism to GDP as a share of GDP, internal travel and tourism consumption as a share of total internal consumption, travel and tourism direct contribution to GDP as a share of GDP, and night spent at destinations. This table, we can see the descriptive measures of the variables we used for estimating the tourism performance index. And as we can see from this table, in the fourth column, standard deviation, there are huge numbers almost for all variables. Given that, we understand the existence of high variability. And for that reason, we have scaled our data set according to Gaussian transformation. So anything you're about to see from now on is scaled using the Z scores.
Aha, PCA.
Yeah, of course. For updating the performance index in this study, you use the principal component analysis. PCA is a dimensionality reduction method that is often used to diminish the dimensionality of datasets. The ultimate goal is to transform our dataset into smaller ones that that still contains most of the initial information. The most critical issue of the PCA method is the rate of domination depending on the values of the continuous variables. For the latter, we have selected to standardize all variables accordingly, given that the PCA algorithm is quite sensitive concerning the variables of the variances of the initial variables. Finally, the tourist performance indicator was calculated using the sum of the two new components weighted by their level of explained variability. As a baseline in stage 1, we employed PCA approach for the calculation of the tourist performance index based on the first and the second principal components. Particularly, the tourist performance index facilitates to construct a single weighted indicator that includes the maximum information of all the tourist input variables. This table presents the PCA for tourism performance index. As it can be seen from the table panel A, the maximum eigenvalue is 3.858 of first factor and 2.677 for the second factor. The sum of the rest is the eigenvalues is 0.465 with a mean value of 0.093. The first factor has a considerable proportional variation, 55.1%, while the cumulative variation of the first components is 93.4%. The table panel B indicated the eigenvectors loading that shows two principal component factors loading, PCA1 and PCA2 respectively. And in many cases, the values for PC2 are greater than PC1. Therefore, you use both components for the estimation of the tourism performance index. The final tourist performance index was estimated as the sum of the components weighted by the proportional variation of PC1 and PC2. This figure suggests that the optimum components for this study are two. The sum of the rest of eigenvalues is small, and it can be seen in this plot, where the eigenvalue for component 3 to 7 is much less than 1. Thus, the optimum solution for the selection of the number of components is 2. This figure shows the mean values of the predicted factors for PC1 and PC2 respectively. And please keep in mind that this figure has been sorted in an ascending order from left to right. In this diagram, we can see the mean score for each of the two components we choose. And it's obvious that countries with high expected tourism performance index are indeed appeared in the top three list. As we can see, the top three countries are Germany, France, and Italy, while the bottom three countries are Lithuania, Slovakia, and Latvia. This is an evidence that the results from PCA are quite significant. Here we're going for data and methodology for stage 2. For this stage, we collected data from World Bank, Eurostat, World Travel and Tourism Council, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, International Telecommunications Union, and the International Monetary Fund. For the second stage of the analysis, conventional econometric methods were employed in order to identify the determinants of tourism performance. By considering the Tourism Performance Index calculated in stage 1 for each country and for the period 2000 to 2019, as a dependent variable, we have applied 3 different types of models: ordinary least square regression, random effects regression, and finally a random effects regression model. Before proceeding to unit root and co-integration test, we test for cross-section dependence, and then we proceed to test for unit roots. So the data we have here, it's in 3 pages to be exact. We can see the assault level in national rate, the automated teller machine numbers, capital investment as a share of total investment, commercial bank branches, domestic general government expenditure on health per capita, expenditure for travel items in current prices, fixed telephone lines per 100 inhabitants, fixed internet subscription per 100 inhabitants, general government gross debt as a percentage of GDP, gross domestic product in current prices, homicide rates, hospital beds, kidnapping rates, number of bed places, receipts for travel items in current prices, and robbery rate. The variables seemed to appear high volatility, and for that purpose, we decided to go with Gaussian transformation. And our results for stage 2 are in these 2 pages. Before proceeding to unit root and co-integration test, we test for cross-section dependence. Then we proceed to test for unit roots. Both are robust to cross-section dependence. Stage 1 provided the estimation of the tourism performance index for the set of 19 Eurozone countries and for the period 2000-2019. Likewise, tourism performance index was considered as a dependent variable with the aim of identifying the determinants of tourism based on output standardized variables. More especially, the results of the table confirm the positive relationship between tourist performance of a country and the spending by government on travel and tourism services directly linked to visitors. The results further indicate the significant positive relation between tourism performance and the purchase of goods and services of international visitors in the reporting economy. And indeed, the greater the openness of the market and the economy, the higher the tourism performance for each country. Lastly, the availability of beds, the number of ATMs, as well as the number of fixed telephone lines have a positive significant impact on the country's tourism performance. All 3 robust panel models, OLS, fixed effects, and random effects, provide similar significant results, while the stochastic R2 and F statistics indicate the stability of the models. Although in this table we have decided to include a random effect model, we examined the usefulness of the random effect modeling in our panel dataset, while Hausmann test indicated the fixed effect model as the more appropriate. In stage 3, following the conventional econometric methods, we attempted to investigate the determinants of tourism based on spatial econometrics. Spatial analysis as part of quantitative geography uses a scientific method to study spatial phenomena in order to better understand them. The spatial and temporal distribution of tourist flows reflect the difference in the relative competitiveness among different regions within European Union, the Eurozone in our case. And the factors influencing regional competitiveness also influence the distribution of tourist growth. In this table, it is shown the special impact of neighboring tourist performance. The later impact analyzes the influence from factors in neighboring countries and formulates a mechanism of the distribution of tourist flows in Eurozone countries. The positive special impact emphasizes the fact that European regional tourist growth is a crucial policy element towards further growth, and tourist spillovers do exist among European countries. And in our conclusion, the tourist performance in European Union and its development may be characterized by specific aspects. The first aspect is associated with the economic growth. A significant number of tourist investments have been made in several European countries, which did impact national GDP figures. The second aspect is related to the decomposition of tourist output. Actually, the paper decomposed all potential determinants and provided significant insight as far as key factors that affect the output of tourism industry. Our results show a positive special spillover on tourism among Eurozone countries. Furthermore, accommodation, tourism labor productivity, and education have a positive significant effect and increase the output of tourism industry. Finally, it's emphasized that tourism performance output may have a more prominent regional role in the discussion towards economic development, and role in linking local economic development from the bottom up throughout EU funds with regional and national planning. Such argument may coordinate local authorities at the regional scale to provide a well-structured basis for discussion of economic, social, and political spillovers from tourist industry. And lastly, some indicative references. And that's about it.
Okay, we have ample time for discussion. I should quickly announce that George Galanos will be next in order to accommodate teaching schedules. But let's focus on Christos and Harris. Any questions from our group for the authors?
Yes, actually, yes.
Okay, please. Here.
So your findings seem to indicate, if I read them correctly, that economic powerhouses like Germany and France outperform others in tourism.
Yeah, actually,
so, which is quite interesting if you consider now, if you take the idea of specialization, that these are nations who probably are not, or at least for Germany, foremost known for these types of things and do not specialize in tourism, which is a very important indication of what we think about specialization, generally speaking. Just an interesting finding, I think. Also, in all those variables, the determinants you selected, did you take them from some source, or how do you find them? I'm asking for, we have also a study where we try to get a lot of factors in the analysis. I wondered how you selected those factors, those determinants, the big second list one.
Okay, Harry, you want to take that on?
Yeah. So most of our data, hi Pierre.
Hi.
Harry. Yeah, most of our data came from either WTTO or World Bank. So it's an open access data.
Okay.
You can easily find them, or maybe we can also share the data set with you. And what else? Thank you so much for your comment concerning the tourism effect of Deutschland and France and Italy. And the whole idea behind this is that okay, it's nice if we can find proxies of tourism like night spend or any other variables, but I think that the contribution of this paper is that we used more than one, in our case 7. Actually, we used more than 7, but we ended up to 7 variables in order to to minimize the dimensions into just one, firstly in 2 dimensions, but at the end in 1 dimension. And by doing that, we saw that, okay, this index actually means something, and it has lots of information inside. So now that we have the index, let's go to the other states and find the determinant, the exogenous variables of this index. That was the whole idea. And this project is actually in progress. So we are planning to do many more things, and probably I'm gonna use a few things in supervised or unsupervised in machine learning in order to see the spatial effects. What I would be very interesting to see is the spatial effect of these 19 European countries. And when we run the traditional, the conventional econometrics based on spatial spillovers, then we saw that a few variables that were statistically significant using the fixed effects or the OLS were not in the spatial econometrics, and others were. So I think there is a lot of things that we can do further to improve this paper. And thank you so much for your comment.
It's just I'm just interested, because if you think Germany, France, Italy, we're talking about the largest also in terms of population. I wonder if this is something we should go after. And I have no idea if that's something you can add, or a test or something you can do. Look at size, maybe factors that are more items that are more directly related to tourism, such as number of World Heritage locations, number of museums, average temperatures throughout the year, or things like that, if such data is available, to see how this.
Yeah, I mean,
we have bad experience with temperatures, however. So,
if you're going into machine learning, everything's open.
I think this actually leads nicely to the next presentation, but I'll make one quick observation. It's a question, really. The data here is reported in raw terms. It's been transformed into Gaussian z-scores. But is it in raw terms of nights, or is it nights per capita, for instance? Arrivals per capita, or is it just pure arrivals?
It is arrivals per capita.
Okay. In which case, then the size that would control for the size of Germany, for instance, relative to Slovakia.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
I mean, there are other geographic factors. You know, I don't think the heating or cooling variable is going to do much, but there is something to be said for the difference between seaside and mountaintop tourism, and maybe we will see that if we go from the country level to the region level, right? So NUTS 2 versus NUTS 1.
So the floor is yours, and George.
Okay, all right. So we've accelerated George and me. I guess I'm the second person here, but George is the one with the presentation. So hopefully we'll have.
Can I?
Yes, of course. Telemachos.
Yeah,
yes,
for the presentation already on our screens. Just to make a note that, you know, when we talk about tourism, our minds go to vacation tourism by foreigners. But here, I'm not sure if this data is capturing that. So it could be an effect that, you know, Germany, you're also going to have a lot of business tourism, right, coming in. If you're looking at the hotel stays. And I see in Italy, just anecdotal experience, there's a lot of internal tourism.
And so transit.
Yeah,
Germany is a big transit stop, like the UK, if you're going to other places. So flights coming in and out are people who are not staying more than maybe an hour in an airport in Germany. Frankfurt is, I think, the biggest hub on the European continent.
Well,
London
that's why you use hotel nights, because I think
exactly. Nice example for this is Belgium, that it's the same story. In and out visitors, no overnights. So we try to overcome this with this.
we will see that actually that effect in the in George's data and mine. So
sorry, Jim. Thank you. Sorry, Jim. Just one word.
Sure.
Thank you, Telemachos, for your comment. However, my beliefs are that tourism is actually and business tourism and maybe domestic tourism and all this. So in order to capture the overall tourism performance index, we should definitely take into consideration these subsectors of tourism.
Yeah, just make it explicit, because you see immediately the discussions go to, you know, beaches and museums and things.
Yeah. You're right.
No, but it makes sense. I agree with this because
it doesn't make sense. Yeah, of course.
Luxembourg, for instance, right? No one traveling internally in Luxembourg is going to spend the night for business, because you can essentially get from one end to the country. You can sleep every night at home, even if it's a business trip. So I think that might have an effect as well, just the sheer size of the country, right? Because it is much easier to have an internal trip within Germany than it is to have an internal trip within a smaller country. Okay, any further questions for Haris or Christos?
I was just wondering, is a fixed telephone lines something from older literature? Do we still, I guess fixed telephone lines means businesses, right? But the way telecommunications are evolving, you might want to take another look at this, because I'm pretty sure any paper you saw in the literature had this there, but it could be that it's getting outdated. So
yeah, actually, it's impressive that the fixed telephone lines variable was significant, while the internet connections were not. I was expecting totally the opposite. So
but you have data across 20 years, right? And for the first part of those 20 years, the internet connection would not have been as
thank you. You're right. Yeah, thank you.
All righty. So I think with that, George, I think the floor should belong to you, and we'll switch the presentation.
You can stop sharing.
Okay, let me share.
Yeah, I see that Juicy still has not joined us, so we're still.
No, she has not. I don't know why.
Do you see the slides?
Yes, you should go to presentation.
Okay. First of all, nice to see you all again. And secondly, I want to thank you for accepting doing the presentation second, because I haven't managed to schedule a class that I have in the master's program. So the whole idea of today's the paper that I will try to present today was that we have seen the COVID, and let me say, we were discussing with Jim. I was referring to my questions, my feelings that we are going on that Europe was going once again to the wrong direction, depending of the Resilient Fund, because they use methods in order to split the money in each member according to some macroeconomic data. And I was referring to him about that Greece and other countries, especially in the south, they have a lot of problems because the mix of their economy is basically on tourism and travel and other this kind of services. So we started discussing about these things, and we ended up of deciding to look up for the financial of tourism. So the main problem that, as I mentioned before, that we have seen during this period of the COVID-19 pandemic, that Greece and other countries are facing a larger problem because of their dependence in such industries. So we're starting investigating the viability of tourism as an industry. As I mentioned, the purpose of the study is that to investigate the viability of tourism as an industry, and we evaluate the impact of tourism of the gross domestic product of the entire countries, and we try to seek to predict the rate of default or bankruptcy among firms within the tourism centers. We're coming up until today's presentation and today's analysis, we haven't reached that point, but we are in the process of trying to find out. So we use data from Eurostat from the year 2000 for the member states, and we used the conventional econometric models and machine learning techniques to evaluate the financial of the health of tourism, and we make a comparison within Greece and other countries and other prefectures in Europe. The description of our methodology was literature review, data, pre-processing, conventional econometric modeling, machine learning evaluation panel, synthesis analysis and conclusions. As I said before, they are preliminary. So the background, I won't step up to it. As I mentioned before, started with the idea of the crisis coming from the pandemic. And then we have literature review to see, let's say by the literature, the economic shocks and what happened to Europe and all around the world with the pandemic. And we have seen, due to COVID-19, the sector that have declined and the measures that have been taken all over Europe, especially. And our methodology has, let's say, 5 steps. First of all, we created a panel and we have used econometric models in order to fulfill the gaps in the panel. Jim, you may interfere anytime if you want to explain something more.
I do want to clarify something. Mm-hmm. The random effects model, and we have this observation, which I see consistently, but cannot at this point fully explain. It's really the pooled OLS. So pooled OLS and random effects, when you scale the data in Gaussian terms, turn out to be exactly the same. There's no difference between the two. So usually, if you take the 3 classic models, you really reduce to 2. And what I've done in running the underlying data is we wind up with pooled OLS, fixed entity effects. So we look to the difference among the regions, and we have a fixed time effect. So we look to differences among the years, and then we look at fixed entity and time effects. Mm-hmm. So just to clarify, the random effects and pooled OLS are the same.
There you see the correlations among during database variables. We have used hospital, heating, cooling, unemployment, GDP, per capita, arrivals, establishments, and nights. And you see the statistical significance in this panel. And then we started with the first analysis. We gathered an imputation of the data. We used the LOES polynomial split methodology along in independent worthly. You see the text here, the imputation of nights of Eastern and Midland. And you see how our observations are going. Then we had the idea of Gaussian scaling and train test splitting data. And then you see how this works in terms of target variables in the tourism database that we have created for each one of these data that we used. Then we had 4 linear models: pooled OLS, fixed entity effects, fixed time effects, and fixed entity and time effects. I think, I don't know if it's so clearly.
Let me explain this, because this is worth first of all, you'll see that there's a split between the training set and the test set. And the reason this is important is because the true test of performance in a machine is not how well it trains, but in how well the machine works on data that has not been used to train the machine. So you do have to split the two. We were able to use something closer to 64-36 instead of 75-25. So we have more, we held out more data because it was just such a deep, rich data set. As you can see, the test and train statistics are very close, which is an indication that it generalizes well to new data. Now, what you can see, because this is all in Gaussian terms, you can see the right skewness of the data very clearly, right? You have -1 is really the bottom value in Gaussian terms, -1z, but the outliers stretch all the way to +6, and that's a huge number. And anytime you take entity effects into account, you'll see that the FEE and the FETE models at right struggle to predict the higher values, whereas the fixed, the pooled entity and the fixed time effects models are visibly more accurate in predicting especially the higher values.
So the next one, you see this income comes from the split version of the data, where we pulled the OLS and fixed entity effects and the regression of the tourist database with standard versus guide values, and we have a linear model limitation with entity effects.
Okay, so this is to make the make it more familiar to a traditional practitioner of econometric methods, and this is what I call a sundew plot, because there's a funny plant that looks like this. I'll someday I'll show you the what inspired this, but the idea is to see which of the two models is the one that needs to be corrected, as it were. So if the line is in that color, that's the model that needs correction. And as we see, there are some places where the absolute deviation from the ground truth is greater for pooled OLS, but by and large, it is the fixed effects models that struggles, especially as you move higher and higher in the observed tourist sites.
And then we used the 4 machine models with random forest, extra trees, XX boost, and light GBM, which are, let's say, one of the things that they have created clusters that they have given us a lot of ideas, a lot of thinking about. Yes, Jim?
Okay, so quick overview of machine learning. So the random forests and extra trees are ensembles of decision trees. The idea is to have a very large number of small trees, and that's why they're called random forests or extra trees. Each of them, the extra trees has an extra layer of randomness because it doesn't pick the same number of predictors for each tree. Then there's a gradient boosting idea, and gradient boosting is a more advanced idea where you take the errors in each residual to inform the next tree. So these are all ensemble machine-based methods, and you see that they're almost identical. There's a principle of machine learning that says it's the density of the data and the correctness of the data that matters more than the specific machine learning algorithm. And as you can see, the results are remarkably similar.
And there, here you see the splacking blender, that the exact fixtures weights of it from these 8 models. Each one of them has taken all the data that we have put in it, and we have pooled OLS, fixed entity effects, fixed time effects, fixed entity and time effects, random forest. All these methodologies come up with this picture.
George, let me focus on something, because this is easy to miss, but it's a profound point. So the stacking blender in the lower right is the model of models. And the RMSE for test, the bottom line, the number there is the smallest of all the test RMSE is the smallest, 176. The closest is light GBM, where the test RMSE is 0.179. The combination of all models is actually better than any one individual model. It's not the average. It's not dragged downward by the weaker models. Instead, the weaker models contribute something that even the strong models don't have. So the inclusion of weaker models is never a problem in this kind of approach.
Here you see something. You see these 2 arrivals and establishments in the blender, and how significant they are in after the analysis that we have made through the machine learning. Yes. And here you see the application of those fixed weights at 2 different levels of unsupervised learning: the regional level regression and the direct application on observations. I think the next one, it's much more easier to understand the clustering that we have, that it is made. And at the end, we have the sorting of the database with having Greece territories more easily to understand. So in this panel with the 3 dimensions, we have seen the importance and some very interesting. We have some very interesting, let's say, findings about Greece and about some territories of Greece. Let's say about Crete, that we used to think that is one of the most, let's say, tourist one, where you can see here that you won't find Crete. You will find not you.
Oh, you do find Crete. Crete is in the far. Crete is in the far right. It's in the very dense amount. It is not very distinctive.
Yeah, but it is not in the gold territory, where is the most let's say significant as Notio Egeo. So here you see the remarkable discovery that the learning decomposed and manifold transformed into a single dimension matches or beats the underlying pooled OLS prediction on unsplit data that Jim has already mentioned.
George, go back one and let me explain something to everybody. So if you look at this, what's interesting about this representation of the data is that it's remarkably linear, right? When you cluster everything and reduce it to 3 dimensions, it's really a 1-dimensional reduction. You can see this even though it is 3-dimensional. It's really, you could capture most of the information with a single line. It's obvious that Luxembourg in the light green as a non-Mediterranean, non-Greek is one of the lowest performing areas relative to its population. And Corsica is off the chart at the other end. And what we see is that this alignment is roughly linear. It's a single dimension, which is what inspired the next one. So go ahead and advance back to where you were, George.
Yeah. Here.
And you see, you can compare the upper left with the lower right. And if you look at the statistics, they are almost exactly the same. If anything, the unsupervised OLS at the end is actually better after all the clustering and all the unsupervised learning is better than the original econometric pooled OLS, which is remarkable because we added nothing. We did not, this is not designed to be predictive. But once you actually do all the clustering work and then reduce it back to a single dimension, that single dimension is more accurate as a representation of your data than your original pooled OLS econometric model, which is pretty remarkable. And we even handicapped this. This was not the we did not use all the data. All we did for this particular chart was use the weights based on the linear. Okay, so the mixed linear models. So the pooled OLS, the fixed entity effects, fixed time effects, fixed entity, and time effects. We did not use any of the machine information. If we used the machine information, this would have been even better.
Okay. This is more or less one of the things that shows again the observation of the tourist database that we have used, and we have, as you can see here, this is the linear regression versus PSA and MDS isomap as an unpredicted composite, and as preliminary conclusions, let me say that the basic idea of our project was first to create a panel. We have to complete the panel, to use analysis to complete the panel. Then we have used this also traditional econometrics and also machine learning in order to come up with, let's say, the basic statistical analysis that we needed in order to understand the financial of tourists. And basically, the things that we have seen is that, and the next step of our research, it's to understand about the policy in order to create, after doing all this econometric analysis, and after explaining the methods that we have used for the econometric analysis, to go and see how we can recommend things in the policy agenda. We have seen one of the things. We have think that we are now in the period that we not speak about countries, we speak about territories, and there are territories across Europe that they have the similar tourist product, and they use practices in order to having better results in the tourist industry. The other thing that is very crucial that we have seen is that we have seen places that warm and cool, having people from Europe going for vacation during the year. So we have different places depending on the tourist product, but having the same results. So it's methodological. It's about establishment and it's about quality of services, things that we are now going to see in our research. Jim, if you want to add something else.
Sure, yeah. Let's go back to the one with all the
this one?
Go further, just with actual individual regions.
Okay.
There we go. Or this is okay too, but the go ahead one, because it's actually very interesting. Go ahead there, further back toward the end.
To the end, okay.
Toward the end.
Tell me when. Here?
There you go.
Here.
So, so what's interesting here is that you can see all the names. These are not every region is represented. These are clusters with the dominant region indicated. And I've got more code that will show you whether it's uniquely one region or it's multiple regions. But there's almost too much information here. But what we can see is, this is what your point is, George. Look at the values at the left in the golden region. These are the ones that are the highest clusters in terms of the nights per capita. And we see that, the Southern Aegean, Notio Aegeo, is by far the highest performing Greek region. But look at the Italian regions that are the equivalent. Outstanding performances in Bolzano, Trento, and Val d'Aosta. These are Italian Alps. It's the opposite of what you think of when you think of Notio Aegeo. And Corsica, which is the best French region, is also is closer in spirit to Notio Aegeo than to the Italian Alps. And then the one German, you'll like this, Pierre. Mecklenburg-Vorpommern.
I noted.
Who? That's insane.
That's C. That's essentially.
It's the closest saltwater to Berlin. That's my interpretation.
A lot of local tourism.
Yeah.
I think there, and family tourism, and especially budget. Eastern Germany, Mecklenburg. It's also one of the economically weakest regions in Germany, and also relies strongly on tourism. So I don't know how that fits in the data, the weight of tourism.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that. Now, there's some that are expected, right? In Portugal, one of the strongest performances is Algarve. That's to be expected, okay? In Greece, you see the stronger performances by places like Notio Aegeo relative to Attiki, all right? So Athens is not the strong tourist attraction that some of the others are. So this is what happens when you break down the analysis of tourism from the NUTS 19 countries in Europe to the 176 regions of the 19 countries in the Eurozone. George, what do you think in terms of policy, what this says for decision-making at the national level in Athens or in Bratislava versus policy-making at the European level in Brussels?
I think that one of the things that we have seen is that, and we are, as I mentioned before, we are running it all the time, is that in Europe, they use data in order to, especially in the European Union, they use data in order to come up to decisions that there are data that, let's say, they are all the same for all Europe.
Mm-hmm.
But as we have seen before, they have to analyze the particular the particularity of its economy in each country in order to create, because they use methodology, and they use, let's say, ideas that they create programs for all Europe, but it's not all Europe the same. It's not the same. Come up to you cannot understand how Germany goes to the tourism sector, because Germany in the tourism sector have a totally different, let's say, mix of economy than Greece.
Mm-hmm.
So
I wonder. Oh, sorry.
Yes, Pierre, please.
No, George, finish, please.
No, I finished more or less.
Just for me, I just wondered why we maybe it's in the design of the data. Where do places like urban tourism pools, like I see Corsica, but I don't see Paris here anywhere, which if you know,
it would be, I do know where those are. That is all in this this collection toward the purple side of it. So Luxembourg, Ile-de-France, places that are, the exception is Hamburg. It's shocking how well Hamburg does as a big city. Right, and there's some weird, Åland in Finland is much more, much higher performing than Helsinki. Okay, so as a general rule, the big cities are in the meat of the distribution. Right, they are close to zero or below. There are quite a few of them are below zero. In a range where you start from -1 at the bottom and go all the way up to 6 at the top. So this is not, you can't see the actual z-score for the for nights per capita, but in this particular scale, but it does correspond pretty closely to it. And it's hard to see because a lot of this is just very it's very cluttered, and I can always suppress the production of each name. But if we want, we can find exactly where each region ranks, and I can tell you that the big cities, as a rule, so it's true for each country, right? In Austria, it's Tyrol and Burgenland, which are higher performers than Vienna. In Italy, by far, it is the Alpine regions, less so Veneto. Just the higher the population, generally speaking, the lower the dependency on tourism, and as a result, less less performance is measured by nights per capita. How does you have your hand up?
Yep. So it's a pretty nice job that you have done. Now, I have two things to say. I have to note here. First of all, following on what Pierre mentioned for the previous presentation, I think that here we have a data set on a NAT2 level, and with not too many variables, too many factors. However, it's I would say a pretty rich data set. So I guess maybe George or Jim could say a few things about the problems you faced with in order to fulfill the data and fill in the gaps, because I believe that it's quite interesting for all of us to have a baseline on this.
Sure, George, if you why don't you go back to the front for that one? And you have a second question.
Yeah, and now let me connect with my second question. It would be a good idea, and based on what you just discussed with Pierre, to have another, let's say, binary or not binary variable in order to capture the main the big cities and the others, or maybe using 4 or 5 different categories. So it would be interesting if we had the same analysis in different, let's say, levels of regions, based on you can think about on what.
Let me address this. Let me address this directly, because this is a first, because I think this is a general methodological issue that I've seen now that I've worked with you on 5 or 6 things now, and this is a consistent thing that I see. And we have a range of tools. Instead of using categorical variables, which machine learning absolutely hates, right? Because what you have to do is you have to create if you have a variable with 8 different categories, okay, you wind up having 8 separate dummy variables, and the dummy variables create sparsity. And now what you have is by adding 1 categorical variable, you're not increasing the dimensionality by 1, you're increasing the dimensionality by 8. And that's basically the problem with the fixed effects model, right? A fixed effects model for the number of entities actually added 176 dimensions to this data set. What I find a better use is to use clustering and see if the cities, if you can observe through clustering that the cities gather in one place, the seaside resorts in another place, and the mountaintop destinations in a third place. And I think we do see some of those effects, although as you can see, Bolzano and Val d'Aosta and Trento are obviously similar to each other, but there is absolutely nothing physically, culturally similar between Notio Aegeo and its neighbor, which is Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. Those are utterly different parts of the world, but their performance is the same.
I totally agree with you. And when I said about the variable with categories, I didn't mean that we should include this variable in your model, but we could split the data set into different data sets.
We should definitely use, we should definitely use clustering results to make that kind of analysis.
Yeah, but what if we do a simple classification based on our knowledge of the regions, and then let the model clusters the data set?
I have actually done that with, and it would work. I think it would work for this data set, to be honest with you. We can even split Germany, for instance, between the Western regions and the Eastern regions, so that Mecklenburg-Vorpommern is different from Hamburg because, well, one was the old German Democratic Republic and the other was the old Federal Republic. And you can make that distinction, and I've done it with other data where I just use a dummy variable for socialism. Okay, so any country that had a socialist, Soviet dominated or Yugoslav, so we could actually have an intermediate. So it could be a three categories, right? Soviet dominated, ex-Yugoslavia, and the rest. And it actually, it generated something like 0.5, 0.6 in R squared, which is actually kind of miraculous that it has that much prediction. So we can make use of that kind of analysis. I do want to address your first question about the Los and polynomial spline. George, will you go back to the very beginning? And this is actually not the best illustration.
Here.
One more further back toward the beginning. Excellent. North. Here. Yeah. This. So this is imputation, and what I wanted us to see is that the this is not the perfect example because this is just linear, but linear is a subcategory of polynomial, right? So if the reason I did not use a higher order polynomial is because if you did, the trend right here would have put the number out here in the stratosphere. And with linear imputation, it just went straight to this last observation. So you have to be very, very careful about this. But the lowest algorithm is local regression. So what you do is you engage in local regression in each instance, and then you add the polynomial feature, whether you want it to be linear, you want to be quadratic, or you want to be cubic. And for the for things like employment rates, especially if it's interpolation instead of extrapolation, it works very well. But you have to be very, very careful with this. And it's a nice extra methodology. And the benefit from this was that we were able to use 176 regions times, what was it, 9 or 9, 10, 11 years. So we had thousands of observations instead of hundreds. And at the NUTS2 level, this was important because, well, as you can see, it gave us a lot of deep insights. And the value of this is that you never have to settle for missing data, right? You don't have to exclude observations. You can now impute with confidence. So that's a nice finding. All right, we've probably used too much time for this one. I see that Juicy has joined us. We have 2 more papers to go through. So Juicy, do you want to proceed, or do you want to catch up? And I believe that Telemachos is the other presenter.
But hi everyone. I think I can meet the last one.
Thank you.
Okay. So George, we will. You should yield to Telemachos. Have a good class.
Thank you. But let me. Your remark tricked me, and thank you very much. We will go and see why we have seen all the cities not in the big picture, because let's say cities like Paris, like Berlin, they have 50 million tourists per year. But we haven't seen them.
For instance, in Germany, the biggest extraction is Neuschwanstein.
Oh, well,
No,
yeah.
no competition.
Yeah,
Not even by a mile. Millions of tourists. That's what.
Yeah, Oberbayern shows up very high because of that, right?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you. Have a good class, George. Bye-bye. Okay, so that means Telemachos, you are up.
Yep. Okay. So
Oh, I see that Kathy has joined us.
Right on time. So I think you can see my presentation, correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'll start with bad news and good news. So the bad news is it's not a really data-heavy presentation, right? The methodologies are not that advanced. Good news is I compensate that by speaking less. So this will be a quick presentation. So this is a joint effort by me and another 3 colleagues here from academia. I'm with, just to say, with the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. So I have to put the disclaimer that this presentation is my own personal view. For me, this is the most important slide because it keeps my job relatively safe. So having said that, the paper has 2 parts. One is a theoretical model, and the other is an empirical. So the emphasis is on the theoretical model, and the motivation starts. So the emphasis, the motivation is that, after all these financial crises, we see a change in the institutional framework between fiscal authorities, monetary authorities, and these kind of things. So we're trying to see what is the room for public debt management, and I'll come back to this in a bit. And then the empirical part is where we start to slowly try to prove what we argue. So just a reminder of public debt management. So here we're talking about sovereign debt management. And there are basically 2 categories of goals for public debt management. One are the debt goals. So raise the required amount of funding, new debt and rollovers. And the other is to achieve the risk and cost objectives. And I'll come back to this in a bit. And then you have non-debt goals, right? So the IMF talks about developing and maintaining an efficient market for government securities. Promoting, Ms. Allenblatt talk about promoting credibility for anti-inflation stance. And 2 of the authors of this paper, we had a paper talking about how to use public debt management to accelerate economic growth. So here's one of the basic equations. So we assume a Lucas supply curve, right? Well, we assume here that credit expansion increases output, at least in the short term. And here, if you want, the most problematic or the most ambitious argument is that this credit expansion is partially dependent on the average residual maturity of the overall debt. So the lower the debt, the maturity of the government sovereign debt is, you have credit expansion, and this creates output. So these are explained in the model. I won't go into that. You have the paper in any case, but just to talk about optimal maturity. So this M here that I show, right, there is an optimal value because if short-term debt increases the risks of refinancing. On the other hand, long-term debt, you might have unpredictable market conditions, right, on the long end. So an optimal maturity structure of non-contingent debt exists. So there is an optimal maturity. However, as said, one can use public debt management for credit expansion, at least in the short term. And this, because a change in the maturity structure can lead to bank liquidity. But this means that if you're using the maturity structure to pursue this goal, then you're deviating from its optimal amount. and this cannot be fully offset by the central bank through inflation and inflation expectations. So we show two cases. One for the government manages public debt, and they have the incentive to manipulate this maturity to create these short-term positive shocks. And the other, well, there's an independent public debt management office. So, and we show that it's worth improving, or argue at least, to have an independent debt management office. So that is the theoretical part, if you will, the results from the theoretical. And then for the empirical, we want to test, to test this equation, to test the Lucas supply curve, that the augmented Lucas supply curve that I showed previously, especially focusing on the credit expansion and the output gap. So on the left-hand side, you have the output gap. On the right hand, you have the various variables, but we focus on the delta. So we do our panel data analysis with fixed and random effects models, as well as a combination of OLS with panel corrected standard errors. We use data from 12 Euro area countries, the first 12, from 1999 to 2017, and now data is coming from OECD. So here are the results. So I'll just leave this a minute. So the fixed, we have all models show that the change in credit expansion is positive with the output gap, which is independent, which is a dependent variable, excuse me. And the Hausmann's test shows that there's evidence that the fixed effect model prevails. So we also have here the specification tests, right? Actually, this should have been one table, sorry for that. So the left column is the fixed effects, and the middle column is the random effects model. And this more or less is what we've done so far. And then we want to start, going country by country and different time periods. So then we might want to invest more in machine learning. So this is, the first steps into moving into something more elaborate. And now I'll stop here, just for the sake of time.
Okay, very succinct. That's wonderful and very nice. Any questions?
Yeah,
Pierre,
yes,
we can't hear. Yeah, please.
Could you go? What was the assumption you were, or hypothesis you were having? Just because.
So basically, this green square here. So on the one hand, that a change in credit expansion increases output, at least in the short term. Mm-hmm. And this credit expansion also is linked to the maturity structure of sovereign debt. It's a bit far-fetched.
The credit, the expansion, or the gain in output, or
so the maturity structure can push. If you change the maturity structure, you can push credit, create a credit expansion, and then that would push output. A short-term lived effect, but it's there.
I do have one question or suggestion.
Yeah.
With respect to this particular model, if the hypothesis is, and I assume that you concluded that you could reject the null, right? That this does in fact have a significant effect. Instead of focusing on the average maturity, which is a single point, right? It's a 0-dimension point estimate.
Yeah.
Is there a way that you could test this against the shape of the yield curve?
Yeah.
Right, because it's not just the average; it's also the distribution of. Because if every bond that is issued is exactly 5 years out, that's the same as a mixture of 1-day bonds and 10-year bonds, mm-hmm. right? So you know, if you add all the zeros and tens, and but they're radically different, because you have one country that issues debt at a regular interval 5 years out, and the other that splits between a very long bond and a very short bill. So if there's a way to do this, then one very simple suggestion, of course, is to use the moments of statistical distribution, right? The mean is obviously your point, your central tendency, but you could also use standard deviation as a measure of the of variability, and you can also use skewness to show whether it tilts toward the long side or the short side. So there are ways that you can use very simple statistics even if you don't have a direct measure of the shape.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Yeah, the truth is that we were really fixated on the model, if you will, and now that we're trying to dig into some empirics, that's very useful. Thank you.
Any further questions? This is a very very focused paper, right? Has a single focus. You're really aiming. This is your one truly true variable.
I can really show that. Give me a second. From the paper. So basically, what is it? Yeah, basically we conclude something like this, right? Mm-hmm. Again, I don't want to get into the details now because I know this puts people to sleep and it's Friday afternoon or morning. But these are the kind of things that we were examining, and now we want to go to the empirics to try to prove this, right? Mm-hmm. Because it works on paper, but then how do you show this? How do you convince the referees?
But this is your true independent variable, and everything else is a control. And this is and what you're doing is you're optimizing this value, right? So
basically what we want to say is that, look, if this is controlled by the government has an incentive to use that for short-term output extensions. But if you give it to an independent, public debt manager, they only care about minimizing cost and risks. So it's more a paper on the institutional design, right? Mm-hmm. So just like with central banks that you say, okay, government wants to use inflation for short-term gains, so give it to an independent central bank. This is more or less a similar argument. It's not that unique, but the mechanism we're trying to show here is more or less original.
So one final set of questions. It is typically thought in macroeconomic policy, right, that the yield curve and the interest rate have an impact not only on credit availability and output, but also on inflation and on unemployment. Mm-hmm. And I don't see unemployment either as an independent or as a control variable here.
We capture that, through the output gap.
Through the output gap, okay. Yeah. So yeah, it's at least implied, but I think if the aligning the model with traditional understandings of central bank policy making might be helpful.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Anything else on this paper before we welcome Juzi? Okay, so Telemachos, will you go ahead and unshare, and this will give Juzi a chance to post her presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then I will eventually be the last one, I guess.
Okay.
If you want, you can present now.
No, that's fine, Juzi, that's fine.
Okay. Okay. So, are you able to see my presentation? I think yes. Okay. First of all, I'm sorry because I arrived late I thought I was wrong with the time. So I received a message from Thomas, and so I understood that I was not I was wrong with my timetable, and so I'm here, but I'm a little confused. Sorry for that. Also, I'm sorry because the paper is not finished. So this is essentially my fault. I was late with the preparation of the paper, so we are still awaiting the elaboration, and so I will present you the main idea of this paper. As you see, the paper it is focused on the crisis, and in particular, we wanted to examine the relationship between bank and sovereign bond yields. This paper is a sort of follow-up or continuation of other two papers that we have prepared. One concerning the sovereign bond yields, and the other one the cover bond yields, so bank bond yields. We have already examined the determinants of sovereign bond yields and the determinants of bank bonds yields. What we wanted to see now is the relationship between the two yields in crisis time. There is a wide literature concerning this topic, in particular during the sovereign crisis. We wanted to go ahead with this literature, and we wanted to analyze the main determinants of this relationship, sovereign bond yields and bank bond yields. We have all the data. We have to consider in a different way this data, because in our previous works we considered the yields in a group of European countries. So we consider all the countries together, and we have, of course, significant variables explaining the sovereign yields and the bank yields. Now we study a small group of Eurozone countries, and we want to see how this the relationship between covered bonds yields and sovereign bonds yields changes in different crises for different countries. So this is the main idea. As you can see, having analyzed bank bond yields and sovereign bond yields, we are able now to consider the relationship in particular countries. So the first consideration is that recent financial crises appear different, and in particular we know that the financial crisis and then the sovereign crisis started because of banks. So banks were more they try to they were greedy. They wanted to have more profits with difficult operations. We know everything about the financial crisis and the sovereign crisis. But the starting point was they were the banks. Now with the pandemic, so we want to arrive till the 2021 with the data and with the analysis. Now we know that the crisis, if there will be another crisis in the Eurozone countries, hopefully we hope that there will not another crisis, but if there will be another crisis, it will be because of companies, corporations. So banks now are strong because there were some regulatory and some new regulations, I say, and also there is an improved supervision. Banks are more capitalized, so they are not the focus of the crisis. If there will be a crisis, it will be because companies that are not able to repay their loans, and so they go bankrupt, and then for this reason banks will have an increase in non-performing loans, and then from the banks we can have an effect on the sovereign risk, and so on sovereign yields. So the crises are different, and we want to consider the main variables that can explain these differences. I don't want to be boring with all these. Why covered bonds? Covered bonds are the bonds, bank bonds, that are more similar to the sovereign bonds because they are safe. They are quite safe, and the investor strategies they are used sometimes in a similar way as the sovereign bond. So we try to put together and to see the relationship between the yields of two different financial instruments, but not so different, because covered bonds are a safe financial instrument because they have collaterals. The main research question is, what is the changing relationship between bank and sovereign cost of funds borrow on capital markets during crisis period? For some countries, so I think that we can analyze Germany, France, Italy, Greece, and perhaps Portugal. And we want to explore the determinants of this relationship. So going ahead, the data, we have a data set with data from Bloomberg and from the ECB data warehouse. And we start from 2006 to 2021. So I extend in the last days the data set to April 21. Okay, what we wanted to examine is first of all, okay, this is the model. We know that bank bond yields, as you see in the orange, are given by bond-specific variable and macroeconomic variables. But we know also that they are affected by sovereign bond yields. And so we wanted to revise these two models that we have already analyzed, the bank bond yields model and the sovereign bond yields model, and we wanted to see the relationship between them in particular countries. this is the what is new in this study. Sovereign bond yield. Okay, we know that these macroeconomic variables are all significant in determining the sovereign bond yields. We want to add some bank variables because we know that sovereign bond yields are different in different countries depending on the banking system. So in the Eurozone, this is different from the US countries, US banking system. So in the Eurozone banking system, we have a strong impact of banks in the economic system. And so sovereign bond yields are influenced by the banking system in each country, which in the Eurozone country could be more or less strong. So if we have a weak, for example, banking system, this is something that is risky. And so this riskiness also will affect the sovereign bond yields. So this is the main idea. The sovereign bond yields and the bank bond yields are interrelated, and we wanted to explore the determinants of this relationship in different countries with different banking systems. So the idea is this. In order to do that, we also explore all the exogenous events determining the crisis and also the European Central Bank programs. Usually with the crisis, we have an increase in the yields because the bonds become more risky or riskier. And on the other side, with the European Central Bank, we have a reduction in a decrease with these programs. We have a decrease of the riskiness of the bonds, and so a decrease in the yields. So we want to study different periods in different countries. And here you can see the bank bonds with different, the crisis periods are the same, and you see in yellow. But, and also this will be the dummy variables that we will use in our model. And then you can see also the program, the European Central Bank programs, that affected the years in the past. So till now, you have all the programs. Very important is that I also told you that banking system in Eurozone are stronger now than in 2007, 2008. This is because of the new regulation that you can see the last part of the slide. New regulation that is the European Banking Union. With this new regulation, we have a new system of supervision. And also we have a new system for a new mechanism for the bankruptcy of banks, for solving the crisis, the banking crisis. This is for bank bonds, and we have to consider that for sovereign bonds we have also the same crisis. So the financial crisis, sovereign crisis, the pandemic crisis, you see in the last row. But okay, we have a different program, European Central Bank programs, because the European Central Bank prepare different programs, purchase programs in particular, for sovereign bonds and for bank bonds. So the landscape is quite different, and so we wanted to find the relationship between these time periods for bank bond yields and for sovereign bonds yields. Okay, this is essentially what I wanted to tell you. The results of the model, okay, for this we have to attend. Sorry for this, and this is what I wanted to explain and to share with you the main idea of the paper. Thank you for your listening.
All right. Apologies, I had to let some workers into the house. But do we have any questions for Giusy?
Well, I think we owe you the paper when it is finished, so then you can ask questions.
Well, since you're a co-author on it, Thomas, do you want to go ahead and proceed, and then we can come back at the end and have general discussion?
Yeah. Let me try to share my presentation. And I do not know if you can see it.
We see that Poufinas has started screen sharing. That's what we can see.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. So, well, let me say a few things about this paper. This is not finished yet, but for a totally different reason. We want to look once and again into forecasting into insurance, not only motor insurance, but any type of insurance policy or product or line of business, and not only claims, but also premiums and whatever other figure we can try to forecast. Now, this is a real problem, and it comes from the fact that insurance companies have to produce business plans that normally go 3 to 5 years into the future. So far, and I can explain a bit about it, what is motivation. So far, there is not a lot of literature using machine learning. Pretty much the conventional approaches use actuarial techniques, but machine learning has produced results primarily in the last 2 years. And so we think that insurance is under-researched, and versus banking that is probably over-researched. So let me explain a bit what the motivation behind the paper is. We want an accurate forecasting of insurance claims because this is important for 3 main reasons. First of all, claims in insurance constitute the basis of pricing. So contrary to other services, the validity of the pricing and the adequacy of the premium is proved only after the experience has been reported. So insurers try to forecast the price, but then they will know whether this was adequate only post-mortem. Then traditional pricing is based primarily on historical data, but it is the occurrence of incidents in the future that determines whether the estimated burning cost was correct or not. That's one. The second reason is that future claims occurrence is important for the compilation of the business plan. Now, insurance companies, pretty much in a way similar to banks, have solvency requirements, which are even stricter, and they go much further into the future. So future claims affect or even determine the future profitability. And the claims experience is probably the most significant determinant of the operational profitability of an insurance company. And the third one is having a forward-looking approach in claims is a prerequisite for the own risk and solvency assessment process and report. The ORSA depicts the risk appetite of the insurer and thus the required capital for the solvency of the insurer. And as a matter of fact, it requires one of the biggest portions of capital allocation. So insurance companies need to know how their claims will evolve and how their premium will evolve. So in this paper, we capture motor claims. It's primarily data-driven. So getting our hands into real data from insurers is not easy. I mean, it's their activity. They don't want to share it. They're very cautious about it. They're afraid it may get into the wrong hands. So we managed to have an insurance company to provide us the data. This paper is unfinished because although we got the data, we realized, and the people in the company realized, that the data had to be cleaned. In other words, there were parameters missing, and it was not easy to match the different files. So it was a very simple problem. So they are working on it to fix it because they are interested in seeing the results. And one of the important, let's say, arguments we had to persuade them to get the data is that in traditional and conventional methods, as we will see, they try to match their data with one known probability distribution function. Well, guess what? This may not be the case. The portfolio may behave in a totally different way. So what is the problem? The problem is to forecast the claims evolution of the motor insurance portfolio in terms of total claims paid, outstanding claims amount, number of claims, average claims amount, and loss ratio, which is the ratio of claims by premium. And we want to use machine learning techniques to do that. Well, for those of you that know me, I never put, literature review in paper presentations in conferences because I think we need to focus on the methodology and the other issues and the results primarily. In this case, I opted to put it so as to show that it's primarily a young research. And second, unfortunately, we have no results yet. So, it will be an opportunity to explain what has been done so far. And I will try to do it in a concise way. So, as I said, machine learning application in insurance is limited. Interest has risen primarily in 2020. And not all functions of the insurance activity have been researched yet. And a limited number of machine learning approaches per function have been applied. So we think there is ample of room for advances in the application of machine learning techniques in insurance. And a summary is presented. First of all, the pillars where it is applied, and second, what has been done so far. So there is interest in product development and underwriting, which incorporates risk assessments, premium calculation and pricing, portfolio analysis, and monitoring of profitability. Then in the offer, which includes pricing, sales, and marketing, there we have advances in customer analytics, in cross-selling analysis, so you can have lead generation with large databases of customer behavior. Price sensitivity and discount analysis, where you can have even individualized offers and premium with the use of telematics, for example. And then what is also available is dynamic online pricing. Then one of the biggest problem of insurers is to retain customers. So you can have retention models or, the opposite side, churn models. It also facilitates sales channels analysis, and then you can even have a recommendation engine. So based on the profile, you can have a recommendation insurer. When we go to services and claims, well, this is where we focus. It can facilitate the claims processes, so there can be automatic classification to reduce the processing time. You can combine the expert opinion with existing labeling of claims. There is assessor assistance. There is prevention in private and commercial lines. So, for example, to use censored data. Claims reserving, which is a bit relevant to our research, which can be even at an individual level, and fraud detection with, for example, text for voice analysis. And last but not least, the functions influenced are financial risk modeling, reinsurance optimization, solvency requirements, and valuation. So why the application of machine learning in insurance is feasible? First of all, we have had technological advances that resulted in the digital transformation of insurance companies. There is product innovation that is using telematics. We can have usage-based insurance like the pay-as-you-drive.
Did we lose Thomas?
I think he is spinning. Well, we did lose him.
Oh, he's on his way back.
Okay.
Okay, I must have pressed something and I lost you. So let me share this screen again. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely hear you. We can't see your screen.
I'm trying to share it. I don't
Oh, here you go. You're coming back.
Okay, no worries. Okay. So let me try to put it in a full screen mode. And then you have wearables where you have health monitoring. Then on services, it's online claims. You can use drones instead of agents. And then digital transformation facilitates the use of machine learning approaches. Then machine learning in insurance incorporates, classical multivariate statistical modeling techniques, algorithmic techniques. I think Jim mentioned some of them. I will try to mention what we will use or what we started using, although we have no results yet. And then most recently developed techniques. So in the previous session, I think we discussed about ensemble methods, such as random forests, support vector machines. And then I also saw in the presentation of the previous paper, extreme gradient boosting and deep learning, or I heard about deep learning methods. So these approaches facilitate what we're trying to do. Now, the merits of the use of machine learning in insurance are, first, that they operate in an automated or even automated fashion. The gains are in the efficiency and costs. They are applied to large data sets, so we can have many variables and or many observations, which increases the confidence as no observations are probably left out. Let me explain that normally outliers in traditional actuarial approaches are left out. They require a relatively short computing time, so we can fit larger number of models. They produce outputs that are tailor-made to the insurer, which is what we want to capitalize on, because it offers better solutions to existing problems, but also it assists in solving new ones. And an indicative list of machine learning applications. And then what I have done is I went through the literature, and you only see the names of the authors just in case you want to look it up. I didn't put the entire APA citation. So we have in claims in the area of motor insurance, in the area of liability insurance, in the area of export credit insurance, and in flood insurance. Then when it goes to pricing, we have motor insurance, we have deposit insurance, we have variable insurance, and then we have generic approaches. When we go to underwriting, it is focused primarily on motor insurance. when it comes to retention, to customer retention, the literature we found was in household reserving, which is quite important. Fraud detection in motor health and in generic and some generic approaches. I'm not distinguishing on the machine learning model because, as you can see, the applications so far are very limited. So depending on the author, you see a different model, but when you have only one paper identified, then okay. And then in accounting estimates. So, and then when it comes to solvency, it's in non-life. So what is our data? Our data set comes from a motor portfolio of an insurance company, and it covers a period of 13 years. It includes premium per type of coverage, per coverage period, per type of vehicle, policy fees, expenses, and taxes, the sum assured, and then claims, which is paid claims, but also outstanding claims. So it's per type of coverage, per type of vehicle, per coverage period, and associated fees and expenses. So as I said, the conventional or the traditional approaches attempt to match the claims frequency and severity experience of the insurance company with a known probability distribution function. So such an approach may not fully reflect the actual claim experience of the insurer. What machine learning approaches offer are, they are based on the actual claims experience. They don't depend on known distribution functions, and thus they can be used to replicate what has been done so far and to forecast future claims. So we can pretty much proxy any let's say, data set we have. So in this paper, we used a series of machine learning algorithms from from support vector machines to decision trees and random forests. And we tried to forecast two of the most important variables of interest for insurance companies. That's the number of expected claims in the next period and the classification of forecasted claims between types, small and large claims. So traditional forecasting models are also used in order to evaluate and compare our results. And we apply ElasticNet variable selection framework that allows us to distinguish from the initial set of customer characteristics a smaller subset that determines the number of claims and their type. Unfortunately, I will not be able to show you the results. So I'm afraid this is a bit of theoretical, but I will try to explain what we use where. So we employ supervised categorical machine learning, and that means we try to do a classification, and we try to do first of all, a binary classification. So to separate our database between the vehicles that had accident versus the vehicles that had no accident. And then a multi-class classification that uses, unfortunately, the vehicle characteristics only, because one of the issues we had is receiving driver characteristics. And we were not able to receive any driver characteristics because of GDPR, etc., etc. So it's as I said, it's the first step. Now, as I said, it may seem a bit of educational, but Jim may like it because I know that last year he gave a presentation that was a bit of a tutorial of
Thomas, you see.
Yeah. You still there? So we seem to have lost his image. He's still logged in. There you are.
Your mic is off. You're muted.
I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but anyways, I will try to continue. So anyways, we, using support vector machines, meaning that, you try to separate your data set by choosing the separator that pretty much has the maximum distance between, the data you are trying to separate.
I'm not sure if you know, but we don't see your presentation now. I'm not
We can
sure.
only hear. Yeah, we can only hear you. We don't even see.
I'm sorry. Okay. Let me share again. I'm sorry about that. Okay.
There we go.
Let's see if I can do it full screen.
Right. Advanced.
You
You were on slide 32 when you went off.
Okay. So I was trying to explain, and I think I was telling that you gave a tutorial in October on machine learning, Jim. So I'm trying to explain what it means to try to separate data. You can have several lines drawn to separate your data. So what support vector machines are trying to help you with is finding in the 2 dimensions the line that has the maximum distance from your two, let's say, subspaces. And then, of course, okay, we want to find that that's again a repetition in case the previous slide did not work. The thing is that we can use a trick by applying a kernel function to separate the data when the separation in the 2 dimensions is not feasible, when they're not linearly separable. And we started doing that, but we don't have any results because of the reasons I told you. So pretty much we introduce a 3rd dimension with a kernel function, and then we try to project it. So I have a video here, but I don't think I will use it. It has a very nice, I don't know if it will work, first of all, in Zoom. Do you know if it works? If I
it should. If you switch to your screen, you're sharing your whole screen. The moment you click, it should switch.
Okay, let me try to do it. I hope it will not explode. Okay, it's not mine, it's not ours, but I think it's a very nice way to explain how this works. If it does not, I will.
No, it's coming. Whoops. It was working and all of a sudden it died.
So I need to, just a minute, I need to switch to what? I need to share. I need to share my screen or the video.
You should share your screen because that would be your.
Yeah, I found it.
There we go.
No, that's not it. No, that's not what I want. I always thought I knew how to do it.
I have a quick technical question for you, Thomas. If you can do support vector machine classification, you can just as easily do regression. Was there a particular reason for choosing the classification between large and small claims instead of directly regressing the amount that you would expect
it's a traditional. Yeah, it's a traditional.
Yeah, I know it's a tradition.
Approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, because small claims have a large frequency, but the problem in large claims is also in properly modeling the claims. Mm-hmm. The large claims have a very low frequency, and so we usually separate. Now, traditionally, insurers were putting an exogenous limit, let's say 100,000 euros. Now, the most appropriate approach is, the mean plus or minus 2 or 3 standard deviations. Mm-hmm. We hope that by using, these approaches, we will also be able, what is the threshold for characterizing a claim as, mm-hmm. Large and small. So let me see if this video works. Does it work? Can you see a video? Can you see my screen?
Yes, we see your screen. There you go.
Okay, so let's see these words.
There's no audio, but I don't know if it's... I'm not getting audio, at least.
There is no audio, but can you see the picture or the video? No?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So pretty much what it does is it lifts somehow the data by introducing a function, and then it projects it back to the 2 dimensions. So let me switch back to my slides. I keep doing something wrong, so I hope I will not miss it again. Now, how do I get back to, okay, stop sharing. And I'm going to go back to the slides. Ah, okay, I got it. And then for some reason, some of my slides do not show, but okay. So let me try to share again. Okay. And then we will try to use the decision trees. And you know, Jim, you mentioned it. I'm trying to explain what we're doing. First of all, we separate between accident and non-accident. And then we use the other characteristics of motor insurance, for example, bodily injury versus material damages, and so on and so forth. But we do not know the order yet. It depends on the decision trees what we deliver. And I'm going to skip that because it's theoretic. And then you mentioned random forests. And then the idea here is to have the trees vote on what the next step will be, because decision trees are easy to build, to use and interpret, but they're not as accurate. And although they work nice with the training data, they do not necessarily perform well in the new data. And so random forests perform a bit better because the random forests get to vote on what will be the distinction that will be used for the next steps. I know some of my slides did not show. I do not know why, but that's okay. I think we have very limited time anyways. So where do we start? As I said, the data we received did not provide the required granularity so as to produce results. We anticipate a more complete database with the categories we asked, and also clean database that will allow the application of the previously described techniques. But as I said, unfortunately, we did not manage to have any results yet. And you know, companies have their own time schedule. I mean, they're very willing to help us, but they do not manage to give us the database to produce results. But it's there, so we still owe you the paper. And I will be glad to ask any questions or comments, although I know it is primarily on the methodology employed.
I don't have comments on the methodology. I don't feel competent in machine learning enough. I guess James is the expert there. But on comments, I think this is very interesting. I'm not sure how far the industry in the motor insurance industry is now, but having Allianz, Munich Re, and other big C, and I know how this is especially with the car industry, it's a big issue. Consider this could be very interesting because the lack of we have had similar cases doing IPOs in the past for when you have novelties, you don't know how to insure, let's say, wind parks in 2000, 2001, or the case of dirigibles or something like that. But here we have a revolution probably coming in the car industry, electrical cars, autonomous driving, and dynamics in all those things also happening, and we don't have historical data to see how people will behave. Regulations are changing, and I think if you can have a model, if that works, and if you can prove that this works, this is going to be a manna for the insurance to give, because this is a big problem for the car industry, insurance, that they have no idea how is autonomous driving going, electrical cars going to change, how many let's say even change the number of accidents, the gravity of accidents, and then if you go further into car sharing or something, what are the implications there? And if you can model this in machine learning, I mean, this is a wow.
Thomas, I have a very specific question. I was unfortunately I lost connection just as you got to this point, so I'm sorry if I make you repeat yourself. What kind of what's the time specificity that you have, and do you use a time lag to forecast, or using a static model panel approach?
You mean between the training data and sorry,
yes. When you structure the your data, do you create a time lag so that you are
using... but we did not apply it yet, because as I said, the data we received were not complete and they needed cleaning. So we need to see at the end of the day what that will be.
And do you have, what's your frequency of data? Is it annual or is it monthly? What's the time lag?
Claims are daily.
Daily, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Premia are also recorded daily, but they cover, at least monthly periods. Mm-hmm. So we have everything we wanted in terms of time. Mm-hmm. The problem was that we were missing other significant distinctions, or let's say categories, so that we could manage to even have a plain vanilla decision. Right. So we went back to the company. They said what they can find. They said we asked also driver data, because that's very important. They said, sorry, we cannot release driver data, even masked. Okay. We will have to contain ourselves to vehicle data. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And also that's also interesting and important in claims. We hope we were going to have the place of the accident.
Okay. So the exact location or the characteristic of the place?
That's a good question. Normally there are pictures, but I don't think we can process them. So it will be at least the area.
Okay. So you have geospatial data, which is extremely difficult, but also extremely useful if you can manage to.
I don't think we will receive that. I hope we could, but I don't think we will.
Okay. So what is your data size in the end? If you have daily observations, that's extraordinary, right? So you have a lot. You have a very high N. What is your P? What is your number of variables? And about 12 different variables?
That's also huge, because we managed to get even the breakdown of the premia and the claims.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's right.
Coverage per sum assured. I mean, we must get a lot of data or the different breakdowns. I mean, we have the premium breakdown even to taxes, expenses, the claim breakdown, even what went to the assessor, or what went to the lawyer, or we have what we missed is the different categories of vehicles and drivers. Mm-hmm. So
okay.
But do you have this from one insurance company?
Yes, we have it from one. What we hope is that we will soon get some results. And we will be able to contact other insurance companies where we can get even bigger data sets, or that they are convinced to give us also driver data.
Because I'm not sure, I'm not aware, but I don't, it could be a factor that you have different insurance company operating differently or different geographical or legal situation, which obviously insurance in the States, the way it's handled is probably very different from Germany or from Greece, I guess, in many cases. Where settlement,
yeah, I mean,
instance,
legally, the problem, in the United States is that insurance is regulated at the state level, so you have no easy way to aggregate nationwide. It's very local.
Especially legal practices also do. I don't know how if settlements are more. It's not so common in Europe, I guess, as in the United States. I guess it's with my first maybe prejudiced impression. So this could make a big difference. Also,
it does make a big difference. It does make a big difference. I mean, I think the interesting model is Juicy still here? Did she have to leave?
She's here.
Okay, so I can't see everyone who's here. Somehow I've lost the track of. The one thing I do find that's very interesting is that
in 1 minute.
Okay. Do you want to ask a question, Haris, if you have 1 minute?
I'm fine.
Okay. Okay. So the quick thing I want to say is that the auto insurance and bank insurance. So whether it is deposit insurance or the more traditional concerns about value at risk and capital reserve requirements in banking are very similar to this problem in insurance. I mean, after all, it is a forecast of potential downside risk. Obviously, the variables are different, but the motivation and the objective of the study should be the same.
Yes, I think so. I agree with you.
Yeah. So if you get this right, Thomas, I mean, methodology and Juicy, I would love to, apply. I mean, I also have a little bit of experience playing with bank insurance and VAR and expected shortfall, but it would be best, I think, to play with predictive models to see whether we can truly forecast what a bank is likely to need in terms of meeting the capital reserve and to forecast more realistically just how bad things can get when all of these things actually combine. I mean, the real problem is that you have strong correlations in time and in factors, so that when one factor goes bad, it's not just that predictor, they all go bad at the same time. And of course, there's systemic risk that is very hard to capture in traditional statistical models. So I do think that banking and property and casualty insurance, right, non-life insurance, that's one very strong branch of it, but also banking insurance, whether it's deposits or whether it is the solvency of the bank as a whole, we can apply the very same idea, even if the data set is obviously very different.
Well, with COVID, actually, these two sectors go in opposite directions. So in banking, you see non-performing loans and other kinds of things going on, right? But apparently, insurance companies for motorcycles and for motor vehicles, are making a killing because people are not driving. So it would be nice to, can you capture that data? And also, okay, now you have only one company in one country, but anecdotally, when you have a crisis, people drive less or drive more carefully. So actually the claims go down. So it would be nice if you could see something like that. I know.
Yeah, I will give a specific suggestion. Yep, I'll give a very specific suggestion for this. Juicy, one thing I noticed in your paper, and this actually, you used categorical variables to identify specific events.
Yes.
It might be interesting if you could take the data, and I will show you offline at some point if you want how we can do this. But if you take your data, right, which is really a two-dimensional panel, if you will, right? You have observations ordered by time, and then you have variables this way. So instead of analyzing it that way, we can take the matrix transpose, right? And so what we have is for each variable, you have a different time period. And then what you can do is you can cluster the time periods and see that for this time period, these particular variables are very different.
Yes.
And that way you can say in a mathematically principled way, right, that 2008 to 2009 was important for all of Europe, and that 2009 to 2010 was important for Portugal, Spain, and Italy, then for Ireland and Greece, right? So you have this kind of way of doing it. But I think the tools that we have as applied mathematicians should allow us to do this in a way that is not dependent on a government agency declaring that the ECB action was from here. We don't have to take their word for it. We can actually prove it by looking at the data.
Yes, yes, I think that it's a new perspective, but it's very appealing. So I think that with Thomas, we will try to do that.
Okay. And I'm working on some stuff right now that will do that. But I will share with you both a demonstration of some time periods, because I can, for instance, in commodity prices, I can definitely identify a complete crash of all markets in 2008. Yes. And then in COVID, the only market that really crashed, because they moved in opposite directions, you had actually gold spiking, but all of the fuels, natural gas and crude oil and gasoline, like just completely dropping. So what you had was you had anxiety, macroeconomic anxiety, which increases precious metals, but at the same time, you have this complete loss of consumer use, because you have, European and American shutdowns and no one's driving. Right. So it's the kind of analysis that I think is already there. If you have the data, we should be able to find the relationships. But it's, just to go to your point, insurance, banking, and traditional finance, I think that the same thing can be proved with Telemachos's interest rate and credit availability data. So, okay, we are a little over time, not too bad. We are actually into the time for networking in one of the other sessions or one of the other rooms. We can stay and talk. I think our official program is concluded. So we can all move to a different room, or we can just stay here until the next session.
Actually, I would like to get some feedback, because I didn't present today because we have some issues. The colleague doing data clearing, but I wanted to take the opportunity, since there's a lot of delay on that. It's partly my fault for not calling them and not getting back, but essentially, yeah, I can say it's not mainly my fault.
Well, Pierre, why don't you go ahead and treat this as an informal extension of our session, and just tell us about what you're doing. Yeah,
I'm very much trying to do behavioral stuff. Started with the TTIP image in Germany, looking at cryptocurrencies behaviorally, amongst other things. And the last paper was also about behavior, voting behavior in Germany in relation to the refugee crisis. And this new paper, which was also my idea, I have 3 colleagues from 3 universities from different countries on it. So it's about the relationship between the voting behavior and evidences of civil disobedience. The plan was to take for the civil disobedience, we take the effectiveness of the COVID pandemic lockdown measures, and then the number of incident cases will tell us how obedient people are, essentially, in the countries where people essentially comply to such to the regulations, should have low cases of incidents. And then we conduct a correlation. That was the idea. That's currently the thing that's still on, but here I'm open to new ideas correlated with things like socioeconomic variables, like voting behavior at federal and state elections, education, social benefit, dependence, unemployment rates, the severity of the measures, as well as the penalty and fines for non-compliance with lockdown regulations.
So Pierre, let me understand this. You're trying to predict a rate of compliance, right? That is
No. I'm trying to see if we can explain, if you can find a relation between different, the meta behind this is, I think, many of the things we've experienced, rejection of TTIP in Germany, success of cryptocurrencies, bear with me because it's a long stretch, civil disobedience in the type of, everything is for me an element of the post-2008 financial crisis and the kind of loss of trust in establishment, which is compounded by social media, etc. So I try to find evidences where we can see there is a parallel between all these phenomena.
All right, so what I find interesting, this could be interesting. So what you might be doing here is you might actually be looking for a multivariate, not multivariable, but multivariate regression, right? So what you're trying to do, because you're trying to predict related phenomena, okay? Use of cryptocurrency, which basically says screw it to the euro, right? Or to fiat currency. You're looking at voting for AfD and other,
we have it all over Europe.
Yeah, you have all over Europe, or the equivalent.
And the United States.
Yeah, Law and Justice in Poland, right? Or Fidus in Hungary. You're also looking at civil disobedience relative to COVID curfews and lockdowns. Okay, so all of these, so that's your target variable. You don't have one target variable, you have multiple target variables.
Yes, but in this instance, the last one is we've had. I'm afraid of being too ambitious if I make all of it at once.
Let's look. You can make it a single variable target and multiple variable predictors, right? But you can also do this on a multivariate basis in order to find relationships. But let's take it one step at a time. I have a more basic question for you. Which is more important to you, Pierre? And I think I know the answer, but I need to hear you say it out loud. Do you believe that it is more important to predict the level of disobedience, or is it more important to find which factors lead to disobedience?
Really, it's the factors.
Okay.
Because
so it's one is it's the coefficients and the p-values, to use the traditional language of statistics, that you're interested in, and not the fitted values. The fitted values are a bonus, but your real interest is in coefficients and significance.
Yes.
Okay. So if that's the case, I would say that linear, more traditional, linear, generalized linear models are more useful because they will give you a better explanation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Machine models are better at predicting y hat. Okay, so the fitted values are always better with machines. The explanation is always clearer with traditional models.
I understand, but where I'm looking at this, where we're thinking about the machine learning, was also to see if we can predict also a dynamic, a point where this whatever you want to call it, this disgruntlement, establishment bashing, this distrust, essentially is going to go down.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking for sensitivity
and
analysis,
how?
Right? I mean, so this is more the sense of, if this much changes, what happens to the predicted value, right? If unemployment, in particular, I've always thought this is interesting, unemployment among uneducated men in particular, right? Because if they perceive that they are losing relative to Muslims or to blacks or whatever, I mean, depending on, whichever, or Mexicans, to pick an American example, then this translates almost perfectly into voting for the radical party.
We had a very good case of that on the last paper. I don't know if you
That's
recall.
right. No, I remember we had that discussion. We had that
Yeah,
discussion.
it was not a dynamic, but it's long-term unemployment. It's not the
Right.
short-term, but the long-term
The
unemployment.
long-term
which
unemployment.
really, in Germany, at least, showed
you know, I mean, there's a very, I read the story of a mayor, I think it was Erfurt or Jena, one of the eastern cities, right? And she was very unhappy with a man that she knew in town. They had grown up together, and you know, this is a small, a medium-sized city. And she says, you know, Heinrich, why are you marching with AfD and ph.d? And he says, get me a wife and a job, and I will stop marching against the Muslims. And it's like, well, you know, if you don't get paid and you don't get laid, right? These are two very fundamental measures of success and happiness. You're going to find someone to protest against, and in this particular instance, you know, this is how people vote for AfD and march with ph.d.
It's the feeling, the same feeling of injustice. I don't have a job. And the banks are getting saved.
The banks are getting saved, and so
the refugees are getting money. And
all
also,
the money is going to banks.
I don't get a job, and the EU is giving money to other countries.
And of course,
this type of phenomena. You know?
And in the European context, historically, this feeds directly into anti-Semitism because, you know, you associate banks and foreigners with Jews, right? And so this is really, I mean, it's very toxic, at least in the.
Well, in Germany, this is of course taboo. Just saying the word, probably
even
now,
this I know it's taboo, but it is you know it is in German. Auf Deutsch heißt es die Durchstoßlegende. Okay, so it's the stab in the back that somehow these terrible dark forces have stabbed the true German folk in the back.
Yeah. But this is long gone. Germany now is really like. Very tame in these, so it's
relative to Poland or to Hungary.
No, really, even to France or so. Owning Mein Kampf is a crime. Owning a flag or displaying it, or you're
you can't do the salute. You can't display the Hakenkreuz. You can't do any of those things.
There's now officials in sports in the DFB who are being fired because they said some derogatory term about an ethnic minority. And the Germans are very sensitive to these types of issues now. I think also this may trigger some others who, again, you're protecting those minorities, and I still don't have a job.
But these are proxy wars, right? They're proxy wars because even if you can't say it directly, you can do it indirectly, right? I mean, in America, you cannot use a certain word for Black people, but you can vote a certain way, right, in order to express that feeling. And that is, you know, so what you do is the direct emotional outlet having been cut off, people find other ways, whether it's using Facebook and spreading disinformation, refusing to wear a mask, refusing to respect the curfew, that sort of thing.
But like I said, so the linear model, that's essentially what we were doing now.
Okay.
But like you said, the bonus, we have the federal election coming up. It's too short for that now. I was hoping, but essentially predicting if we where we will be going. Is the AfD going to go down? Are they going to maintain, or are we going to have like a flattening of the curve?
So based on my understanding of Germany, right, I would say that it would be interesting to see it at the level of the Bundesland. And if you can predict the proportion of the AfD vote, you know, because I would think that Mecklenburg-Vorpommern is very different from North Rhine-Westphalia or from Oberbayern. So these are very different places, and looking at the sociological and economic differences, as well as the predicted level, you know. It's obvious that the Eastern lands, you have a much higher rate of voting for AfD than in the former Federal Republic. I mean, these are things that you can actually build into your model, and I think you should.
Well, the last paper gave us some insight into that. So we have some information for these variables, AfD votes, and a number of factors like unemployment, percentage of social benefits received by foreigners, number of percentage of foreigners, change in number of foreigners. We have this data, but like I said, I want to go beyond just the voting behavior into other things, like the things you said. So, but
if I may, so apart from the traditional and obvious explainers that you have here, so for your dependent variable, I would even put in, sentiment coming from Eurobarometer, things like that, because they ask how much do you trust in the EU or things like that, and that's on a monthly basis. If I'm not,
that's a good.
So that could give you something beyond voting, which might be tainted by other things.
Oh,
and the other thing is that if you're talking about you talked about establishment bashing, so that would be kind of anti-elite, kind of anti-science. And I would say start to dip into the literature on post-truth. There's a lot coming out and a lot of information coming out. And some of the things we're seeing here is based on that rather than in combination of that. So with the more traditional, if you want, the more obvious things that we're seeing.
Here, I have another suggestion. Look at the differences in rates of uptake of the vaccine. So you have an interesting phenomenon where people who do not trust government, do not trust mainstream society, have a heightened, increased distrust of the COVID vaccines.
The rate of uptake, I don't think, I'm afraid, won't be such a good indicator because there are big difference in Germany in the rate in which people are getting vaccines, because it's managed even at the region level now.
Yeah, but you can put it in terms of availability, so you know
that's right. That's right.
I don't know if I can get those figures, because
I think
in some cases it's just there are backlogs because local institutions are unable to
this
cope.
is one you should put on your Richmond hat and look at American data, because the American data is striking. Is absolutely striking. So the places where you have the greatest, I mean, it's almost 1-to-1, with one exception. So there are two drivers. If you voted for Trump, you're not going to take the vaccine, even though he wants credit for it. Number two, if you're Black, you probably are not taking the vaccine. And that has a deep historical reason because of a very severe distrust of public health among Black people. So even though that points in the opposite direction, very few Blacks voted for Trump, but those two factors, if you are a Black Trump voter, you're almost guaranteed not to take it. I mean, it's a very small group, but that group is not taking the vaccine. And as a result, if you look at a state like Mississippi, which is very high in Trump voting, but the rest of the state that didn't vote for Trump are Black voters, Mississippi has about 1/4 of the uptake, whereas California and New York are closing in on 60 to 70%. And it's a very striking difference. And you can get this data very easily in the United States for the 50 states, and you can probably get deeper into congressional districts.
If you'd like an example from Europe, right, a bit extreme, but you really have to dig into the data, not just what's available on the European agency's side, is Romania. So now you can go to Romania, go to any vaccination center, say, hi, I came, I want this vaccine. So apparently, and this is a bit anecdotal, but the preliminary data I've seen seems to back it up. About 15% of the population took the vaccine and then they just stopped, right, in the whole country. And this is based on, many things going on there. But that, if you want something bit closer to home.
Where do I get reliable data? For instance, I know that France has been gathering data on vaccines digitally from the start. And to a very surprising level, Germany is not even halfway there. So
you can just start with the European Agency for Control for Diseases, ECDC, or yes, I always mix up the acronym, right? The one in Stockholm. And they are the ones managing all the data, the aggregated data, let's say officially. So start with Phil. And
I think
Okay, so-
that's an area where we have in Germany, there is really a lag in the quality of how data is being gathered, really.
Thomas says he has to go, and I think
Yes.
we are definitely